Hello everyone and welcome back to the Lost Planeswalker. You're here with me, Jesse, the Lost Planeswalker, and today I'm building a Ghalta Stampede Tyrant deck that I'm calling Overrun for the win. So Ghalta is a brand new card that we're going to see coming from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan, and it is 5 green for 8 mana in total, legendary creature, Elder Dinosaur with Trample. When Ghalta Stampede Tyrant enters the battlefield, put any number of creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield. So essentially, how we want to play this deck is cheat as many things in for free as we can with Ghalta. That seems like it's going to be really fun. You know, this is a mono green deck, so obviously we're going big in Stompy, but this was a super fun deck to build. So let's dive right in and look at those lands that I have included in the deck. Very basically, I have Ancient Tomb, Castle Garenberg, Cavern of Souls, Nykthos, Shrine of Nyx, War Room, 28 Forests, 1 Mosswort Bridge, a Reliquary Tower, and Boseiju, who endures all. You know, these lands are just general utility. You know, Cavern of Souls is great in this deck because we want to be able to protect our commander even if we don't play any more dinosaurs. If we can just protect our commander from coming out, it's well worth it. Nykthos, Shrine of Nyx, also is going to be able to generate us a ton of mana, and Ancient Tomb, obviously, is one of the best early cards to play, so we can ramp out early, even at the cost of some of our own life. Now, moving into the second category, this is just purely ramp, and there are 30 cards in this category. You know, take or choose what you want, but these are some of the best cards that are going to help you ramp or create mana or just do whatever you can to get ahead of the game. So first off, we have Arbor Elf, Birds of Paradise, and Llanowar Elves. All of these do the same thing in this deck. We're going to untap or tap to create green mana. Next is Ronos' Monument, Wild Growth, and Karmetra's Acolyte. Ronos' Monument is going to make our green spells 1 cheaper to cast, which is great. And whenever you cast a creature spell, target creature you control gets +2/+2 and gains Trample until end of turn. This is going to be a great way to be able to swing in with some of those big threats we have by buffing them and giving them Trample. Wild Growth says whenever Enchanted Land is tapped for mana, it adds an additional green. Pretty good in this deck. And Karmetra's Acolyte, 3 and a green creature human druid. We tap it to add an amount of green to your mana pool equal to your devotion to green. Our devotion to green is going to be pretty high in this deck because we have a lot of things that have 1 or more mana pips, especially once we get those bigger things in. So this is just going to be as powerful, maybe even stronger than Nykthos Shrine to Nyx in this deck. Next up is Elvish Mystic, Finhorn Elves, and Goreclaw Terror of Quasimals. So Finhorn Elves and Elvish Mystic both tap to add a green, and Goreclaw is going to make our creature spells with power 4 or greater 2 less to cast. And whenever it attacks, each creature you control with power 4 or greater gets +1/+1 and Trample until end of turn. This is going to be the second sort of thing you see throughout this deck, is just giving our stuff Trample. We already have a lot of big creatures that we're going to be talking about, but if we can just give them Trample, that is how we're going to win in this deck. Next up, we have Rampant Growth, Utopia Sprawl, and Kodama's Reach. All of these are going to help us ramp. Rampant Growth, putting a basic onto the battlefield. Utopia Sprawl, enchanting a land. And in this case, it's just going to be green. But we can choose any color, and Kodama's Reach puts 1 on the battlefield and 1 on our hand. Llanowar Tribe, Arcane Signet, and Cultivate are next. Llanowar Tribe, probably one of the better mana dorks in this deck. You know, it's going to tap to add us 3 green, which is super great. Arcane Signet, any color, but really we're just using it as a cheap mana rock here. And Cultivate, search for 2 basics, put 1 onto the battlefield tapped and the other into your hand. Sakura Tribe Elder, Soul Ring, and Somberwall Sage is next. Sakura Tribe Elder can be used to prevent some blocking damage by sacking the response and getting a basic onto the battlefield. Soul Ring, obviously, is a great include in this deck. And Somberwall Sage taps to add 3 mana of any one color, and we can spend this mana only to cast creatures, which is not entirely what this deck is. You know, we do have a lot of mana rocks and other things in it, but we are going to really care about casting a lot of creatures, so this is good. Next up is Topiary Stomper, Gwenna, Eyes of Gaia, and Dryad Arbor. Topiary Stomper is one of my favorite cards from the new Capenna set. It has Vigilance, and when it enters, go search for a basic and put it on the battlefield. And it can't attack and or block unless you control 7 or more lands. So it's just a little plant guy that's going to sit on the battlefield, and then when you get to 7 lands, it's going to be go time. Gwenna, Eyes of Gaia adds 2 mana in any combination. We can only cast creatures or activate abilities of creatures, and whenever we cast a creature with power 5 or greater, we put a +1/+1 counter on Eyes of Gaia and untap it. This could be a really good card later in the game when we have a lot of mana available to us to, you know, untap it and be able to cast multiple things. In Dryad Arbor, one of the coolest land creatures, maybe the only land creature, but yeah, it's really great. Nylea Keen-Eyed, 3 visits, and Emerald Medallion are next. Nylea makes creature spells cost 1 less to cast. 3 visits lets us put a forest onto the battlefield and then shuffle. And Emerald Medallion just makes all of our green spells 1 less to cast. Definitely worth it in this deck. Next is Selvala, Heart of the Wilds, Throne of Eldraine, and Delighted Halfling. Selvala says whenever another creature enters battlefield, its controller may draw a card if its power is greater than. With Ghalta as our commander, I really don't see any other players having a creature larger. Then we can tap a green to add X mana in any combination of colors where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Perfect, we really like that. Throne of Eldraine is a new card from the commander cards from the Throne of Eldraine that says when it enters, we choose a color. Perfect. Green. We can add 4 mana of the chosen color. Spend this to only cast mono-colored spells of that color. Wonderful. This is going to help us generate a ton of mana. It is 5 to cast, but it's really good. And then 3 and tap, draw 2 cards. Spend only mana of the chosen color to activate this ability. Later in the game, 3 mana to draw 2 every turn with this is pretty good. I'll definitely take it. And Delighted Halfling. This is another great card, especially in our deck because we can add 1 mana of any color, which is going to be green, and spend this mana to cast a legendary spell, and that spell can't be countered. And the last 3 cards we have is Nyxbloom Ancient, Old Gnawbone, and the Great Henge. Nyxbloom Ancient has Trample, and if you tap a permanent for mana, it produces 3 times that much mana instead. This is going to be excellent if we can get this out quickly to just cast a bunch of stuff from our hand. Old Gnawbone is another great and big threat, but says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, create that many treasure tokens. With a board like we're going to have, I mean, Old Gnawbone is just going to generate us more mana and more treasure tokens than we even know what to do with. And the Great Henge is an expensive card, but it's going to get discounted by the big creatures we control. And whenever we tap it, we can make 2 green and we gain 2 life. And then whenever a non-token creature enters battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw a card. So this is the second part of our plan that we're going to move into as we look at the next 2 sections. But we want to draw as many cards as possible to fill up our hand, so when we cast Ghalta, we can just dump all sorts of good stuff onto the battlefield. So this next category I'm going to talk about is going to be talking about the big threats that we're going to be generating. You know, with this kind of deck, we want to be having as many big threats or things that are going to help us get as much value as we can. So first off, we have Vigor, Terastodon, and Soul of the Harvest. Vigor is one of my favorite cards and probably one of the more salty cards, in my opinion. I don't know how salty it actually is, but if damage would be dealt to another creature you control, you just prevent that damage and put a +1/+1 counter on it for each one damage prevented this way. And even when Vigor dies, it goes back into our library. So the only way to really get rid of it is exiling this big threat. Terastodon is a 8 mana 9/9 elephant that says when it enters the battlefield, you may destroy up to 3 target non-creature permanents. For each permanent put into their graveyard this way, its controller creates a 3/3 elephant creature token. And Soul of the Harvest, whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. This is a 6/6, so it's getting up there, but it's going to help us fill up our hand even more. Verdant Sun Avatar, Garruk's Uprising, and Ghalta Primal Hunger are next, with Verdant Sun's Avatar gaining you a ton of life whenever it or another creature enters the battlefield, you gain life equal to its toughness. Garruk's Uprising says when it enters battlefield, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. This just gives everything trample, and whenever a creature with 4 or greater enters the battlefield, draw a card. Ghalta Primal Hunger says this spell costs X less to cast, where X is the total power of creatures you control. Most likely, we are just going to be casting this spell for only green. Next is Kolga the Titan Ape, Unnatural Growth, and Surrak and Goreclaw. Kolga the Titan Ape enters battlefield and it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. When it attacks, you destroy an artifact or enchantment target player controls, and we can return target human you control to its owner's hand, and Kolga gains indestructible until end of turn. We do have 4 humans in the deck, but that ability really isn't going to be used that often. Unnatural Growth does cost 1 green, but it doubles the power and toughness of each creature we control during each combat. So this also is on our opponent's turns as well, making our stuff even more of a threat. And Surrak and Goreclaw has Trample, other creatures control have Trample, and whenever a non-token creature enters battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it gains haste until end of turn. Our next 3 is Tyrannix Rex, Zopandrel Hungerdomus, and Apex Altasaur. Tyrannix Rex can't be countered, has Trample, Ward 4, and Haste, and has Toxic 4, meaning this could potentially be a way for us to kill our opponents by toxicking or giving them poison counters and knocking them out of the game. Zopandrel Hungerdomus is 5 green and has the same ability as Unnatural Growth. At the beginning of each combat, double the power and toughness of each creature you control until end of turn. We can also sack 2 other creatures to put an indestructible counter on this big threat. And Apex Altasaur says when it enters the battlefield, it fights up to 1 target creature you control. And it has a sick enrage trigger that says whenever it is dealt damage, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. So if your opponent has a lot of little things, that enrage trigger will keep activating every time it takes damage until you choose to stop. And our last 2 cards are Worldspire Worm and Craterhoof Behemoth. Both very big, very powerful cards. Worldspine Worm is an 11 mana, 15/15 creature with trample. When Worldspine Worm dies, put 3 5/5 green worm creature tokens with trample onto the battlefield. When Worldspine Worm is put into the graveyard from anywhere, shuffle it into its owner's library. And lastly, and possibly one of the best win cons in this deck, just like any in most green creature strategies, is Craterhoof Behemoth. It has haste, and when it enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain trample and get +X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. Now, let's take a look at that last category, which I'm calling good stuff. As always, I put all of the other additional things in this deck that are going to help you out, but maybe aren't the main focus of how this deck is going to work. So starting out, we have Beast Within, Guardian Project, and Lightning Greaves. Beast Within is going to help us destroy any target permanent and just give our opponent a 3/3 green beast creature token. Guardian Project says whenever a non-token creature enters battlefield under your control, if it doesn't have the same name as another creature you control or in your graveyard, draw a card. And Lightning Greaves says equipped creature has haste and shroud. Notably, Ghalta doesn't give anything haste, so Lightning Greaves is going to be excellent in letting us attack as soon as it enters the battlefield. Next up is Nature's Claim, the One Ring, and the Skullport Nexus. Nature's Claim lets us destroy a target artifact or enchantment, and its controller will gain 4 life. The One Ring is just as good in this deck as anywhere else, but it gives us protection for the term that we play it, and we can put burden counters on it to draw cards. This is especially good in this deck because we just want to draw as many cards as we can, so when we cast Ghalta, we have the most things to put onto the battlefield. So the One Ring definitely works great in this deck. And the Skullport Nexus, similar to the Great Henge, gets cheaper for the power, so we're probably only casting this for green as well, and it creates fungal dinosaur creature tokens equal to creatures we control that died during combat. And for just 2 mana, you can double target creature's power until end of turn. If you have this set up and have the Skullport Nexus out and are attacking with Ghalta, you can potentially one-shot your opponents by just doubling your target creature's power until end of turn. Pairing that up with Zopandrel and Unnatural Growth, you can create a 96/96 Ghalta that is surely to one-shot any opponent. Next up in our good stuff category, we have Corrosion Grip, Eternal Witness, and Rishkar's Expertise. Corrosion Grip is one of my favorite instants that destroys a target artifact or enchantment because it has what's called Split Second. And as long as this is on the stack, nobody else can interact after that point. So it can be a great way to kind of stop what's happening or just let something what's happening go through. Eternal Witness says when it enters the battlefield, you can return a target card from your graveyard to your hand. And Rishkar's Expertise is especially good in this deck because we draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control, and then we may cast a spell with 5 or less from our hand without paying its mana cost. Rishkar's Expertise could draw us 12 or more cards in one turn. That seems really good to me. Next up is Up the Beanstalk, Elemental Bond, and Green Sun's Zenith. Up the Beanstalk is a new enchantment from the Wilds of Eldraine and says when it enters the battlefield or whenever you cast a spell with mana value 5 or greater, draw a card. We have many cards in this deck that have mana value 5 or greater, so this is a great include. Elemental Bond says whenever a creature with power 3 or greater enters battlefield, we draw a card. Almost everything in our deck, it seems like, has power 3 or greater, so this is going to be really good. And Green Sun Zenith just lets us tutor up any creature with mana value X or less, and we put it onto the battlefield and then shuffle Green Sun Zenith back into our library. Tribute to the World Tree, Heroic Intervention, and Worldly Tutor are our next cards. Tribute to the World Tree lets us draw a card if its power is 3 or greater, and if it's not, we put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. Heroic Intervention gives all of our stuff hexproof and indestructible until end of turn, preventing us from losing stuff during a board wipe or whatnot. And Worldly Tutor lets us search up any creature card, and then we can put it on top of our library. Maybe we need a win con. We can just get Craterhoof Behemoth. Maybe we want to tutor up something to double our creature's power. Then we get Zopandrel. Maybe we want to protect our stuff. Maybe we get Vigor. Lots and lots of great stuff in this deck. Worldly Tutor only gets better when you think about what you can get with it. Next up is Toski, Bearer of Secrets, Last March of the Ents, and Concordant Crossroads. Toski, Bearer of Secrets, one of my favorite squirrels. It's a 4-mana legendary creature that can't be countered, it has indestructible, and it has to attack each combat if able. But the real kicker here is whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, we draw cards off of it. I really love Toski. I really love this in this deck. With all the trample, we're just going to be drawing over and over. Last March of the Ents, one of the best cards come out of the Lord of the Rings. This spell can't be countered. We draw cards equal to the greatest toughness among creatures you control, and then put any number of creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield. This essentially is our commander again, except we draw a bunch of cards whenever we cast this spell. I really love this. You know, for having a second one of these in the deck, it can definitely come in handy. And Concordant Crossroads is kind of that answer that we need, and there are some others, and maybe you'll include those in your deck, but it gives everything haste. So as soon as we cast Ghalta and play out all that stuff, they can instantly just attack that turn. And the last card I've chose to include in this deck is Allosaurus Shepherd. For 1 green, this spell can't be countered, green spells can't be countered, and 4 green until end of turn, each elf creature you control has base power and toughness 5/5 and becomes a dinosaur in addition to its other creature types. We don't really have a dinosaur theme going on here per se, but we do have a lot of elves with 8 elves, meaning that if we have this on the battlefield and activate it, we have 40 power. In addition, it just makes it so our stuff can't be countered, which is super nice. So tell me what you think. Is Ghalta, Stampede Tyrant a deck you're going to be interested in building? Is there a card I left out? You know, what do you think of this set so far, of what we've seen? Are you excited about it? Please leave all that in the comments down below. I would love to see what you think. And if you have any card suggestions, maybe there's a great card I left out, please leave it down there. I would love to see all that. In addition, if you aren't subscribed to my channel, I would really appreciate that. We're growing bigger and bigger every day, and I just thank everyone for all of the continued support, and I hope you enjoy this video. If you want to help me out another way, please consider leaving a like and sharing this video with a friend. It does matter, and it really helps me out. And with that, let's look at today's Scryfall card of the day with Serpent of the Yawning Depths. Gleams like moonlight on water drew us through the storm and towards our doom. Sayona, Captain Pyles. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you later, Planeswalkers.